and said, that's what I'm going to charge for it. The single price was a real Quaker invention. And it's my great aunt, who taught as a missionary in the Quaker schools in Ramallah, said it just drove the folk in the Arab marketplace crazy, because over there you haggle.
Oh, yeah.
And she would go in to a store, and she knew what a certain item really should cost, and she'd ask what it was, and they'd give her this inflated price because they're expecting them to haggle. And she said, no, I'm not going to pay that, and she would walk out. They'd follow her. Oh, for you. She said, no, you were dishonest. You gave me a price that you knew was not right. I'm not going to do business with it. They learned pretty quickly in Ramallah when Annas walked into a store. But that whole understanding of integrity in the marketplace was important. Concern for the poor, again, they had that light within them. Right here in the High Point community, you had orphanages. You had, again, William Penn School. It started as that normal and industrial school for blacks after the Civil War. You had the Mendenhalls out there on Johnson Street educating blacks who had been deprived of an education. The first mental health hospital, mental institution in America was Friends Hospital up in Philadelphia, based on the model of the retreat in York in the late 1790s. And not just because of that belief that there's that of God in everyone, the poor, the mentally challenged, but also because 150 years into the Quaker movement, when you were marrying in all the time, they were beginning to see a few evidences of what happens when you marry in all the time. And so the first residents of the retreat were family members of the Tukes who established it. But the same with the prison reform, mental health reform, orphanages, houses for fallen women, all of that Quakers were involved with. And then finally, and then see what questions folk. I've already done an hour. Capital punishment. William Penn was opposed to capital punishment. But, and a lot of this came out of Quakers' own suffering and how many Quakers had died in prison or executed. You remember Elizabeth Fry and her work to reduce the number of capital offenses in England from 200 down to 2. Well, William Penn did the same thing in Pennsylvania. He couldn't get by with eliminating capital punishment for treason and first-degree murder because the king required that, but reduced the other 200 down to those 2. And so prison reform, capital punishment, those sorts of things as well. So anyway, we didn't invent America. I think Quakers had kind of an outsized influence given our numbers. And we're at the end of the hour, but if there's time for questions, happy to hang out and see what you can add to this story, questions you may have. There you have it. Yeah?
Do you need an appointment to come to the Friends Center at Guilford College?
Yes, because there's the buildings are all locked now. When I first came to Guilford, you could walk into any building anytime. Now they all have card access. So you have to call ahead to Gwen Erickson and make an appointment.
Yeah. Okay.
And then Will hustle over and use his card swipe and let you in, I'm sure.
I'll even talk you through the books.
Yeah. Yeah, Will has been an intern over there. He's done a lot of research in the archives. And if any of you are interested in genealogy, the best genealogical sources in the South, there.
Guilford College.
Guilford College, small little college up in West Friendly.
I figured out where it's at.
Yeah. Other questions, comments, corrections, additions? Yeah.
Okay, you said, when did George Fox start preaching and really recruiting?
1647 is when he really had his first major epiphany of, he'd been seeking a different way. He kind of went on, if you remember with Joseph Campbell, if any of you are fans of Joseph Campbell, he's writing about the hero's journey. And you think about the time in the wilderness, the people, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, all these religious leaders had to have their time in the wilderness. And Fox went on an itinerant long journey trying to find out what is really true, because he found the hypocrisy of the church, which he just couldn't take it. Holding himself up in hollow trees, reading the Bible, going to priests' houses, conferring with them. But said there was none that could speak to my condition, till he had a voice that came to him saying, "There is one, even Christ Jesus, who can speak to thy condition." In other words, what he'd been seeking outside of himself, he found present as a light within himself. That was the true, real birth of his journey, 1647. And he got a few folk like Elizabeth Hooton and others who followed him. But there were others like James Naylor, who were, many of them, products of the New Model Army, having come out of the desolation of the Civil War and the two Christian armies fighting each other. I said, this is a little odd, and many people saw that same thing and came out of that milieu of the Civil War period. And so there are a number of Quakers who weren't called that yet, were out there sharing this message of, authorities lies within. Break into a Cat Stevens song here. But then the birth date is 1652, because after a period of imprisonment, when we were first called Quakers, he was condemned to prison for his blasphemy of saying Christ dwells within me. And the judge claps him in prison and tells him, "You must tremble and quake before the authority of this court, George Fox." Fox goes, "Thou, O judge, you are trembling and quaking with the authority of the Almighty God. What art thou? You a Quaker?" Yes. But coming out of that prison experience, when he was offered early release if he would serve in the militia, because he was recognized as having leadership, I said, "No, I live in the virtue of that life and power which takes away the occasion for war," by the original peace testimony. So he continues to be in prison. But when he gets out, he starts a journey up into the northern counties of England, far away from the authority of the church and state down in London and Canterbury, and finds kind of ready-made groups that really took in his message. All these seekers groups, these conventicles, folk who'd already left the church and were seeking a different way, and his message resonated. And you went from Fox, kind of a solitary itinerant minister in 1652. By the end of the decade, he had 50,000 Quakers. I mean, it just took off.
My Quakers from that era were in England, and they got kicked out to Ireland because they were the only ones that would.
Yeah.
They went down to Wicklow.
Yeah.
There's the Quakers down Ballymoran or something like that.
Yeah.
For a year, and then came over. So they were over here in 1680 in
Yeah.
New Jersey.
Yeah. Cool. Quaker royalty. Yeah.
When did the Quakers give up plain speech?
Some of us haven't yet. A lot of this happened after the Civil War. And a lot, at least in the South, a lot of it's located right here in High Point, the beginnings of that movement, with the Springfield revivals. In that little meeting house where you have a museum now. How many of you have been to the Museum of Old Domestic Life? Well, that was an old Quaker meeting house. And in 1870, the Methodists came to Trinity and started revivals. And you come out of about 150 years of what Quakers called quietism, of emphasis on plain speech, plain dress, and those social boundary markers that marked our difference as a remnant people from the world's people. It was marked by the plain dress. I've got my gray hat back there, my gray, no collars, no cuffs. That was all, the mere trimmings of the vain world would clothe the naked, William Penn would say. Plain speech, because you said thee, thou, and thy to everyone. Equalizing. Not you, the plural, to those above you. But 1870, the revivals come to Trinity. And they're singing and shouting and music and being slain in the spirit, and especially the Quaker youth who've been sitting in silent meetings for months, sometimes without ever hearing a word spoken, or no vocal prayer, no music. And if someone did speak, it was some old doddering geezer Quaker who would get up and lean on those benches, on the facing benches, and give a long, boring sermon. And circus had come to town, off to Trinity. I mean, it was a circus. And then they would not be invited back to meeting. They had violated the norms of Quaker. You don't go to preaching services. It was a violation of Quaker testimony. And Alan Jay, who had come down here from Indiana to supervise the Baltimore Association's work to rebuild the Southern Quaker, save the Southern Quaker community from those mass migrations that Addison Coffin was, had whole train loads of Quakers going to the north, almost emptying out the Southern community. And the Baltimore friends said, we've got to save that remnant of a Quaker community down there. Alan Jay wound up coming down here and supervising the model farm, rebuild the Southern agricultural community, modern farming practices, revitalize the Quaker meetings, renovate the meeting houses, renovate the boarding school, eventually turn into a college. But if you're going to lose the next generation, if they're all going to go off and become Methodists or be disowned because they're going to the Methodists, all that works for naught. So Alan Jay said, how about if we don't force any change on folk, but we allow folk in a series of general meetings to come and be free to pray or sing or go forward to an anxious bench if they feel the need to. We're not going to force it, but we're going to make it available to save our children for the Friends Church. And so, I don't know how many days they had the revival there. Eventually, he was asked by religious leaders at High Point to hold revival services here because they couldn't agree on anybody else's denominational leader to lead the revival. Let's ask the Quaker. 29 consecutive days leads revivals here with the stipulation that he would not come with a prepared message. Still the old Quaker understanding that God would give you a message and you would rise out of the silence and share that message if you were given a message. He was given a message every night except for one, and there's a whole story about that. But anyway, that kicked the door open for innovations in Quaker worship. There was singing, there was programming. Eventually they were paid pastors, resident pastors. But what that meant was we went from fewer than 2,000 Quakers in the South after the Civil War to more than 8,000 within a decade. Now those didn't come from Quaker homes. They came from outside. And so they didn't come with that cultural understanding of why you used to plain speech or why you dress plainly, all those other distinctive Quaker testimonies. So bit by bit they said, this is works righteousness. It came out of some of those religious understandings of you earn your way into heaven by your plain speech or your plain dress or these outward forms. They call it works righteousness. It's not what Quakers meant, but they brought that thinking and said, we don't need those things. And so within a decade, it changed drastically. Now some of it held on. By 1904 here in North Carolina, there was a split between fast and slow Friends, as we called them. The conservative Friends established in 1904, and they held on to plain speech, plain dress, well into the 1960s, and some still do. Some still do. But as you can tell from the Quakers in your midst, not always. Yeah. But one great Quaker tradition persists. Tonight at 5, at Springfield Friends Meeting, is their annual fish fry. So, you can see Alan Jay's home, half burned down. You can see the old Quaker meeting house where those revivals started among friends. And so, 5 o'clock tonight at Springfield. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your attention. No. that. But thank you very much.